Every one of them thought they were getting rid of a problem. He was building an inventory. 12 years of dead weight, dumped without so much as a thank you. His grandfather wrote it down in a fountain pen 60 years ago. Waste is just a failure of imagination. And Walter Dre had 12 years of imagination stacked 6 high. Walter Dre stands at the edge of his grandfather's 80-acre tobacco and hay farm in Boyle County, Kentucky, the first week of October 1982, watching his neighbor back a truck to the fence line and roll 3 dead tractor batteries into the grass without a word. Just tips them off the tailgate. Thud, thud, thud. Waves once through the cab window and pulls away, trailing blue exhaust. Doesn't ask, doesn't apologize. Just assumes the dead man's land is a dump now. Walter watches the truck disappear down Perryville Road. His pale, gray-blue eyes track it without blinking, his angular jaw set, that faint horizontal crease across his forehead holding steady. He pushes his sandy blonde hair back with one hand, a gesture that'll become automatic over the years, and looks down at the 3 black casings half sunk in October grass. 12-volt lead acids, the kind every tractor in Boyle County eats through every 18 months. Cracked posts, sulfate blooming white along the terminals like frost. Dead weight. He says nothing, turns back toward the house. The farm itself is marginal, and everyone within 6 miles knows it. 80 acres split between Burley Tobacco, allotment shrinking every year as the government tightens quotas, and mixed grass hay that yields maybe 1.8 bales per acre on a generous cut. The fences need wire. The barn roof has a soft spot in the northeast corner where Clyde patched it with roofing tar in '76, and the tar gave up sometime around '79. Walter is 34 years old. He's lived on this land since he was 19, working beside his grandfather, never married, never left, and most of the county regards him as the quiet one, who stayed too long at a table with no food on it. Clyde Dre died in August. Barrel-chested, silver buzz-cut, military spine. Gone in his sleep at 68, with his black rubber galoshes still by the kitchen door, and his brass-capped fountain pen still clipped to the bib of his overalls, which hung on the hook behind the bedroom door like he'd just stepped out of them. Walter buried him in the Dre plot behind the Methodist church. 14 people came. That's Boyle County math for a man who kept to himself and farmed without chemicals when the extension office was handing out pamphlets on ammonium nitrate like candy. Now the grandson stands alone on the porch in his olive-green canvas jacket, cream thermal Henley beneath it showing at the collar, that flathead screwdriver with the yellow plastic handle in his breast pocket like it lives there, which it does. The workshop is where Walter goes that evening, not the house, the workshop. A low concrete block building behind the barn, 16 by 20, with a single bare bulb on a pull chain and shelves Clyde built from rough-sawn oak in 1961. The journals sit on the top shelf in chronological order. 23 composition notebooks, spines cracked, pages filled edge to edge in Clyde's precise fountain pen script. Diagrams of circuits, soil pH charts going back decades, cross-sections of root systems drawn with the care of a botanist. And on the first page of the first notebook, dated March 1944, a single line underscored twice. Waste is just a failure of imagination. Walter pulls the 12th notebook, 1971 through 1974, and flips to a section near the back. A diagram of a lead-acid battery in cross-section. Annotations in Clyde's hand. Lead dioxide plates. Sulfuric acid electrolyte, the crystal structure of lead sulfate, drawn at the molecular level, with arrows showing how it accumulates, how it chokes capacity, how the plates themselves remain structurally sound long after the battery reads dead on a voltmeter. He sets the notebook open on the workbench, walks out to the fence line, carries the first battery back by its handle, 42 pounds of dead potential, and sets it on the concrete floor under the bare bulb. The casing cracks open with a cold chisel and a ball-peen hammer. Inside, 6 cells. The lead plates sit in their frames like pages in a book, coated in white crystalline sulfate crust so thick it looks like salt deposits in a cave. The smell is sharp, sulfuric acid residue, metallic and biting, the kind that burns your sinuses if you lean too close. Walter doesn't lean too close. He studies the plates, runs a thumbnail along one edge. Structurally intact beneath the crust, solid. The lead itself, pure, dense, valuable, is perfectly fine. It's the chemistry around it that failed. Waste is just a failure of imagination. He closes the casing, stacks it against the wall, goes inside, eats cold cornbread and buttermilk at the kitchen table, and sleeps. 3 weeks later, Dale Henning's county car pulls up the gravel drive. You can hear the loafers before you see the man. That particular sound of hard leather soles on loose stone, deliberate and unhurried, like a man who bills by the hour and wants you to know it. Dale Henning, 42 years old, soft-bodied, 6'1", khaki chinos with a pressed crease you could cut paper on, a short-sleeve white button-down with 2 blue pens lined up in the breast pocket like soldiers. Rectangular gold wire glasses. That tan clipboard under his left arm. He shifts his weight to one hip, tilts his head, and smiles at Walter the way you smile at a dog that's gotten into something it shouldn't have. "Walter," he extends a pamphlet. "Heard you've got some batteries accumulating out here. Just want to make sure you're aware. Disposal regulations require transport to the county transfer station. $75 per unit. EPA's been cracking down." He pauses, lets that number hang. $75 times 3. $225 Walter doesn't have for a problem he didn't create. Wouldn't want Clyde's place getting flagged for a violation. Dale says it soft, almost gentle. The way you'd explain something to someone you genuinely believe is too simple to understand on their own. Fines start at $500 per unit. Walter looks at him. That forward-leaning posture, chin tucked, hands at his sides. Not in his pockets, never in his pockets. He takes the pamphlet, folds it once. "I appreciate the pamphlet," closes the barn door. The latch drops with a sound like a period at the end of a sentence. Dale Henning stands alone in the yard, clipboard under his arm, loafers dusty now, looking at a closed door. He stays there a full 10 seconds. Then he walks back to his car, and the gravel crunches beneath him, and he is irrelevant. By the end of that first winter, 14 batteries sit behind the barn, worthless to everyone who left them, and Walter has opened Clyde's journal to a page titled "The Electrolyte Problem" for the first time. Spring, 1983. The second neighbor drops off batteries without asking, and this time Walter is ready with a wire brush and a hydrometer he ordered from a catalog for $11. That hydrometer changed everything. A simple glass tube with a weighted float inside. You draw electrolyte into it like a turkey baster, and the float tells you the specific gravity of the sulfuric acid solution. Healthy battery? Reads between 1.265 and 1.299. A dead one? Down around 1.100, sometimes lower. The float barely lifts off the bottom. And right there, in that gap between those two numbers, is the entire science Walter needed to learn. He learned it from two sources. First, Clyde's journal. The page titled The Electrolyte Problem turned out to be 6 pages, front and back, written in that brass-capped fountain pen's blue-black ink. Clyde had sketched the internal plate structure of a lead-acid cell with the precision of a draftsman. Lead dioxide on the positive plate, sponge lead on the negative, sulfuric acid between them, and during discharge, both plates converting to lead sulfate. That's fine. That's normal. The problem is when it stays sulfated, when those crystals harden, when they grow thick and white and permanent on the plate surface like calcium deposits in a pipe, choking the chemistry dead. Clyde's note in the margin: sulfation is not death. It is sleep. The question is how gently you can wake the plates. The second source was a library book, The Storage Battery, Its Theory and Practice, a 1917 edition Walter found in the Mercer County Library's discard bin for $4. Dog-eared, water-stained, written by a man who assumed his reader was an engineer on a submarine. Walter read it 3 times in 2 weeks, sitting at the kitchen table with a pencil, underlining passages about equalization charging and crystal dissolution rates. Here's what he understood by April. A sulfated battery isn't necessarily ruined. The crystals can be broken back down, dissolved back into the electrolyte, if you feed the battery a very low current for a very long time. Not the 14 amps a car alternator shoves in, not even the 6 amps of a standard trickle charger. 2 amps, maybe less, for 48 hours, sometimes 72. The current has to be patient. It has to creep through those hardened crystal structures and vibrate them apart, molecule by molecule. Walter's first real attempt was a Group 24 marine battery, a deep cycle unit someone had left completely discharged through an entire winter. Hydrometer read 1.080 across all 6 cells. Plates visible through the fill caps looked white as chalk. He hooked it to a bench charger he'd modified with a resistor to limit output to 2 amps, set it on a wooden pallet behind the barn, and checked it every 6 hours. And here's where the first failure hits. He got impatient. 3 days in, the specific gravity had climbed to 1.180 in 4 cells, but stayed flat in 2. He cranked the charger up to 8 amps, thinking he could push through the stubborn cells. Within an hour, the battery swelled. The plastic case bowed outward like a blister. Then came the hiss. Hydrogen sulfide venting from the caps. A smell like rotten eggs mixed with something sharper, something that grabbed the back of your throat. Walter reached for the charger leads, and the acid mist had already eaten through his right work glove. A quarter-sized hole, the leather around it going dark and brittle. The skin beneath, red, stinging, not burned deep, but burned enough to teach. He disconnected everything, carried the swollen battery to the far fence line with both arms extended, set it down in the grass and stood there, flexing his hand, watching the case slowly relax as the gas pressure equalized. 2 amps. 48 hours. Clyde had written it plain as daylight, and Walter had ignored it because he wanted results on his schedule instead of the chemistry's schedule. He never made that mistake again. Word got around, not because Walter told anyone, he didn't, but in a rural county, people talk. Someone mentioned to someone else that Walter Dre was taking dead batteries off their hands for free, and by June of 1983, they started appearing at his gate, 2 at a time, then 4. A truck battery with a cracked terminal post, a pair of golf cart batteries from the municipal course in Harrodsburg. Some came with notes rubber-banded to the terminals. "Free disposal, Walt," one said, the handwriting smug and looping. Another, "Figured you could use more junk for your junk pile." Walter peeled those notes off, folded them once, and dropped them in the burn barrel. Then he carried the batteries to the pallet behind the barn, inspected the cases for cracks, and pulled his hydrometer from his breast pocket next to the flathead screwdriver with the yellow plastic handle. Through that summer and into fall, he built the solar charging rig. Clyde's journal had a full-page diagram, a truck alternator repurposed as a low RPM generator, coupled to a hand-wound voltage regulator using copper wire salvaged from a burned-out motor. But the power source was the real find. A defunct calculator factory over in Danville had stripped its roof of 40 small photovoltaic panels, early silicon cells, inefficient by any commercial standard, maybe 8 watts each on a clear day. Walter bought the lot for $60 and a handshake, wired them in series parallel on a south-facing rack he built from cedar fence posts. 320 watts on a good afternoon, enough to trickle charge 6 batteries simultaneously at the gentle current the chemistry demanded. One October morning, Ruth Kimball stopped at the fence. Petite, wiry strong, her steel-gray hair pulled into that tight, low ponytail, arms crossed the way she always stood when sizing something up. She looked at the growing row of batteries on their pallets, the tangle of wires running to the solar rack, the jugs of distilled water lined up like sentries. "You running a dump back here, Walter?" He didn't look up from the hydrometer he was reading. "No, ma'am. Running an experiment." She shook her head, that single dimple on her left chin tightening, and walked away without another word. Walter started a ledger. Each battery got a line: date received, donor if known, group size, case condition on a scale of 1 to 5. Plate integrity scored the same way after visual inspection through the fill caps. Estimated recoverable lead weight in pounds. Meticulous. Clyde would have approved. By late 1984, Walter has 46 batteries behind the barn, and his first 3 successful reconditions running the barn lights, the well pump, and the electric fence, all off-grid. January 1986, past midnight. The kitchen table lamp throws a yellow cone across the ledger, and Walter Dre sits inside that cone like a man reading his own verdict. Sandy blonde hair pushed back with one hand, pale gray-blue eyes scanning columns of figures he's written in pencil over the past 14 months. 93 batteries logged. Make, model, date acquired, condition on arrival, weight. He runs his finger down the weight column, adds in his head, checks it twice, then writes the total at the bottom of the page and underlines it. 4,200 pounds of lead. sitting behind his barn in Boyle County, Kentucky. Just sitting there. Now here's where the story turns from stubbornness into something else entirely. Walter pulls Clyde's journal off the shelf, that brass-capped fountain pen still clipped to its cover like the old man might reach for it any second, and opens to a page dated November 1971. Clyde Dre, military straight spine even in his handwriting, had tracked lead commodity prices for 6 years, noted every dip, every spike. And in the margin, in that careful block lettering, lead at 14 cents, won't stay. Manufacturing will consolidate. Fewer smelters, more demand. The man who holds when others dump will name his price inside 10 years. Walter sets the journal beside his ledger, pulls the Lexington Herald Leader from that morning. Commodity page. Lead, 18 cents per pound, up from 14 when Clyde wrote that note. And the trend line, even Walter can see it, only goes one direction. 4,200 pounds at 18 cents is $756. Fine. But 4,200 pounds at 40 cents, at 50, at whatever the ceiling might be when those smelters consolidate and battery manufacturers start scrambling. That's a different number entirely. That's a future Clyde saw 15 years before it arrived. Walter closes the ledger, doesn't smile, just nods once at the empty chair across the table where his grandfather used to sit. But holding lead is one thing. Making it work right now, that's another. Through the winter of '86 and into spring, Walter refines what he started with those first 3 reconditioned units. The process gets tighter, more deliberate. 1 tablespoon of Epsom salt dissolved per cell, magnesium sulfate breaking down the lead sulfate crystals that kill a battery's capacity over time. He mixes the solution warm, pours it through a funnel he fashioned from a cut milk jug, tops each cell to exactly the fill line. Then the trickle charge, 1.5 amps, 72 hours, no shortcuts. He built a charging rack from scrap angle iron, wired 6 outlets off a single 20-amp breaker, and ran each battery through the full cycle before he'd even think about testing it. The load test rig is pure Clyde school engineering, a homemade resistor bank made from coiled nichrome wire salvaged from 2 broken space heaters, mounted on a ceramic tile, with an ammeter in line. Walter throws the load, watches the voltage hold or sag, times the recovery. Anything above 90% rated capacity gets a green paint dot on the terminal post. Anything below gets another desulfation cycle. Some batteries take 3 rounds before they come back. Some never do. Those stay in the pile. Those are the future, the raw lead, waiting. Spring of '87. A tan county truck pulls up Walter's gravel drive. You already know who steps out. Dale Henning. 6'1" of soft-bodied bureaucratic smugness, khaki chinos with that pressed crease, polished cordovan loafers crunching on gravel like they're offended by it. New clipboard, brass clasp gleaming, tucked under his left arm. That single mole freckle centered on his right cheek like a bullseye for anyone who wants to imagine flicking it. Walter, head tilted, hazel green eyes behind those rectangular gold wire glasses, scanning the battery rows like he's counting violations. County's drafting an ordinance, open battery storage, environmental concern, lead leachate, acid runoff, you understand. a pause calibrated for maximum condescension. Now, proper containment, lined pad, drainage catch, covered structure. Estimate runs about $2,400. I'd hate to see you get cited when you could just take care of this. Walter stands there, forward-leaning posture, chin tucked, that flathead screwdriver with the yellow handle visible in his breast pocket like a badge. He lets the silence stretch until Dale shifts his weight to the other hip. "I'll need a receipt for that estimate." Dale blinks. "A receipt?" "For the $2,400. Who quoted it? Their license number, date." Dale has no receipt, has no quote, has a number he pulled from the same place he pulls his authority. Thin air dressed up in a clipboard. He opens his mouth, closes it, taps the brass clasp twice, and walks back to his truck. Walter watches until the taillights disappear. Then he goes back to charging batteries. But that night, a different night, later that year, October maybe, a thunderstorm rolls across Boyle County like God dragging furniture. Walter sits at the kitchen table, and for the first time, the doubt is real. The hay operation barely breaks even, fuel costs climbing, and sitting in his kitchen drawer is a business card from a scrap dealer in Danville. 8 cents a pound, the whole pile. $336. Cash tomorrow. He could end this, pay off the feed bill, buy himself a winter without worry. Have you ever wagered everything on an idea no one else believed in? Walter wagered 12 years, and the bet wasn't even half placed yet. He opens Clyde's journal, flips to a dog-eared page. The old man's block letters. The man who sells at the bottom deserves the bottom. Walter takes the scrap dealer's card, slides it between the pages as a bookmark, and closes the journal. The card stays there. He never dials the number. Spring of 1988. A man drives over from Harrodsburg. Equipment dealer, runs a boat rental on Harrington Lake. Needs 6 deep-cycled batteries for his fleet. Heard through the feed store grapevine that Walter Dre has batteries that work. Walter pulls 6 units off his green dot rack, load tests each one in front of the man. 94% capacity. The dealer watches the ammeter hold steady and nods. $35 each, cash. $210 for batteries that cost Walter nothing but time, Epsom salt, and electricity. By 1988, the pile numbers 190 units, and Walter has quietly sold 14 reconditioned batteries to a man in Harrodsburg for $35 each. Pure profit from what was dumped on him for free. 1989 hit Boyle County like a second wind nobody asked for. The Corning glass plant in Danville announced a second shift. The fertilizer co-op expanded its warehouse by 40%, and every farmer within 20 miles was buying new equipment with new batteries and dumping the old ones behind Walter's barn. He never put up a sign, never asked. But word had gotten around the way word does in farm country, through feed store gossip and auction lot muttering, that Walter Dre would take your dead batteries. No charge, no questions. So they came. Pickups rattling down his gravel drive at odd hours, a pair of spent Group 31s tossed beside the fence post. Sometimes a note rubber-banded to the terminal. "These quit on me last Tuesday. Do what you want." 8 units a month by spring of '89, 10 by autumn, 12 the following January when a cold snap killed half the starting batteries in the county overnight. Walter didn't have to lift a finger to acquire inventory. The economy was doing it for him. The pile grew visibly, season by season, stacking up along the barn's north wall like some lead-acid geology forming in real time. And he got to work building a proper station. That spring he poured a concrete slab, 4 inches thick, sloped a 1/4 inch per foot toward a central drain that emptied into a sealed polyethylene collection tank. No acid touching bare earth, ever. Over the slab, he raised a lean-to frame from pressure-treated 4x4s, roofed it with corrugated steel, and lined the interior walls with salvaged ceramic tile he'd gotten for $12 from a kitchen demolition in Junction City. Along the back wall, he mounted acid-resistant plastic trays, the kind darkroom photographers use, each one large enough to hold a battery on its side during drain down. Above the bench, he fabricated a ventilation hood from 8-inch stovepipe, angled up through the roof with a small squirrel cage fan wired to a pull chain. When the fan ran, you could hold a strip of muslin at the hood's lip and watch it suck flat against the opening. Hydrogen gas rises. Walter made sure it had somewhere to go. On the opposite wall, a bank of 6 slow chargers, wired in parallel off a dedicated 20-amp circuit he ran from the main panel. Each charger set to 2 amps, a trickle, patient as dripping water. A battery that took 3 days to bring up was a battery worth bringing up. Rush it and you boil the electrolyte, warp the plates, kill whatever life remains in the cell. Walter understood this the way a man understands breathing. Slow. Now here's where his hands learned something no book taught him. He started grading plates by sound. A brass rod, 3/8 inch, 8 inches long, polished smooth from Clyde's old tool chest, became his diagnostic instrument. Tap the side of a casing near each cell. A clear ring, almost musical, meant the lead oxide crystal structure inside was still intact, still capable of holding a charge. A dull thud, flat, dead, like knocking on wet clay, meant sulfation had penetrated past the point of recovery. The lead was still good, the battery was not. He marked each unit with carpenter's chalk. R for recoverable, L for lead only, S for scrap casing. By mid-1990, he could grade a battery in under 40 seconds. Tap, 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 tap. 6 cells, 6 sounds, 1 verdict. The R units went on the chargers. The L units went to the lead pile. The S casings stacked for eventual polypropylene reclaim. Nothing wasted, nothing rushed. Then Ruth Kimball showed up at his gate. Mid-July 1990. Her fence-line tractor, a beat-up Ford 3000 she'd been nursing for 15 years, died between rows. Battery swollen, terminals corroded green, not a volt left in it. She called the co-op, back-ordered 6 weeks. 6 weeks in July means 6 weeks of fence line going to hell, cattle finding gaps, a season's worth of problems cascading from one dead battery. She stood at Walter's gate, arms crossed, the way she always stood when she had to ask for something. Dusty black muck boots, the folded seed catalog visible in her back pocket, that steel gray ponytail pulled tight. She didn't waste words. "I need a Group 4D, Ford 3000. You got one?" Walter walked her to the lean-to, pulled a unit off the shelf, chalk R still visible on the casing, terminals bright, electrolyte level perfect. $30. She paid cash, no receipt requested. That battery lasted 4 years in her tractor. 4 years from something someone else threw away. She didn't say thank you. She nodded once and drove off. That was better. October 1990 brought Dale Henning back. 3rd visit. Same cordovan loafers, same clipboard under his left arm, same head tilted like he was listening to something only he could hear. This time he had new language. EPA, Superfund, significant liability. He said it soft, almost sympathetic, the way a doctor says terminal. Walter, I'm not trying to make your life difficult. That little upturned nose, those hazel green eyes behind the gold wire frames, scanning the property like he was pricing a foreclosure. But if someone files a complaint, and I'm not saying they will, you could be looking at remediation costs that would bury this place. Walter said nothing for a long moment. Then he walked Dale to the lean-to, showed him the sealed concrete floor, the collection tank, empty and dry because he neutralized and disposed of acid at the county hazmat facility, receipts filed in a manila folder, the ventilation hood pulling air, the logged ledger, every battery cataloged by date received, source if known, grade and disposition. 412 entries in Walter's tight print. Dale looked at it all, adjusted his glasses, flipped a page on the clipboard, wrote nothing. His pen stayed in the caddy. He left without a word, and that single mole-sized freckle on his right cheek was the last thing Walter noticed as the county truck pulled away. Build something it cannot press through. Walter found those words that same week, pressed between journal pages where Clyde had been scribbling about lead futures in 1972. The brass-capped fountain pen had left its indent on the opposite page like a fossil. The full passage read, "Waste is just a failure of imagination. The world will always press in on you. Build something it cannot press through." December 1991. Walter's ledger reads 486 batteries, an estimated 22,000 pounds of recoverable lead. The barn shelves hold 61 reconditioned units ready for sale at $40 each. The pile is now higher than the barn's eave. March 1993. A single paragraph in the Danville Advocate Messenger changes everything. Corning Glass announces the Danville plant will close by year's end, taking 340 jobs with it. 340 paychecks gone like someone snuffed a candle. And in Boyle County, Kentucky, that kind of news doesn't just ripple, it cracks the ground open. Within 60 days, 3 neighboring farms list their land. Equipment auctions pop up on the courthouse bulletin board like funeral notices. A John Deere 4440, a Massey Ferguson round baler, a grain drill barely 5 seasons old, all going to the highest bidder because the families behind them can't make the next payment without that second income from the plant. Farm consolidations start quiet, then get loud. The co-op parking lot thins out. The feed store cuts its hours. You can feel the county economy contracting the way you feel a belt tightening, not all at once, but notch by notch by notch, until breathing gets harder than it should be. And Walter Dre, sandy blonde hair pushed back from his forehead, that flathead screwdriver with the yellow plastic handle riding in his breast pocket like always, walks to his mailbox every morning, pulls the Advocate Messenger out, and carries it to the barn. He doesn't read it at the kitchen table anymore. He reads it standing at the workbench next to the commodity page he tore out yesterday and the one from the day before that. Here's what he does. He opens the paper to the commodities section. He finds the lead spot price, London Metal Exchange, secondary lead, cents per pound. He circles it with Clyde's brass-capped fountain pen, the one that still lives clipped to a nail above the bench. Then he pins the clipping to the barn wall. 31 clippings already up there, arranged in a line that runs left to right like a timeline. 18 cents, 18.5, 19. A dip back to 17.8, then 20, 21. The line climbs the way a creek rises in spring, slow enough you doubt it's moving until you look back and realize the water's halfway up the bank. Walter doesn't celebrate. He doesn't call anyone. He pins the clipping and goes back to work. Now, late April, a Wednesday. A white pickup with a magnetic sign on the door, Prestige Metals Recovery, Lexington, rolls up Walter's gravel drive. The driver is a scrapbroker named Garrett, thick neck, firm handshake. The kind of man who wears a polo shirt tucked into jeans like that makes him professional. He's done his homework. He knows about the pile. Everybody in the county knows about the pile. Garrett stands in the barn doorway, looks at the stacked batteries, rows and rows of them on pallets, organized by grade, labeled in Walter's tight handwriting. And he does the math out loud. 22,000 pounds of recoverable lead, give or take. At 24 cents per pound, that's $5,280. Cash. One haul. He'll bring his own truck and crew. Walter doesn't even have to lift a finger. Walter stands there in his olive-green canvas jacket, pale gray-blue eyes steady, chin tucked the way he always holds it, slightly forward, like he's measuring the distance between himself and whatever's in front of him. He listens to every word. Then he speaks. "Those are my terms. No." Garrett laughs, actually laughs, like Walter told a joke. "Son, you're sitting on a pile of garbage that's worth real money today. Tomorrow, it might not be." Walter closes the barn door, doesn't slam it, just pulls it shut, latches it, and walks toward the house with those deliberate short steps of his. Garrett sits in his truck for a full minute before he backs out. $5,280. In a county where 3 farms just listed because families couldn't scrape together a mortgage payment. Walter said no like it was nothing, because it was nothing, compared to what the wall of clippings told him was coming. The community shift happens without a sound. Nobody dumps batteries at Walter's gate anymore, because nobody is buying new equipment. There's no new equipment to buy, and no money to buy it with. The pile that used to be the county's favorite joke, that crazy dray kid hoarding garbage, becomes just a thing that exists, a fixed landmark. People reference it the way they reference the water tower or the oak at the crossroads, without commentary, without laughter. The silence is louder than the mockery ever was. Meanwhile, Walter keeps working. The reconditioning bench stays busy. Those batteries graded R in his ledger, the ones with plates still intact enough to hold a charge. He breaks them down, flushes the old electrolyte, replaces separators where they've degraded, refills with fresh sulfuric acid solution at 1.265 specific gravity, and puts them through 3 charge-discharge cycles on the old Clyde-rigged charger. 71% come back to 85% capacity or better. 71%. He tracks it obsessively. Every battery gets a card, a date, a result. The remaining 29% that won't hold, they yield an average of 38 pounds of clean lead plate each. Nothing wasted. Nothing. By summer, he has a waiting list. 7 local farmers who need batteries for tractors, for irrigation pumps, for the backup generator that keeps the milk tank cold. They can't afford the co-op price, $89 for a new Group 31 deep cycle. Walter sells reconditioned units at $40 flat, 60% under retail. The farmers pay cash, shake his hand, and drive away with a battery that'll run 2 more seasons easy. They don't say thank you the way you'd thank a savior. They say it the way you'd thank a mechanic. Businesslike, respectful. That's enough. Have you ever held steady when the whole world said, take the money and run? When every rational voice, including the one in your own skull, said, cash out, pay down, survive? Walter held. Because Clyde's journal said it plain, in that cramped fountain pen script, the world will always press in on you. By February 1994, lead spot price has climbed from 18 cents to 31 cents per pound. The county transfer station has raised its disposal fee to $95 per battery, and Walter Dre has not sold a single pound of lead. September 1994. Lead hits 42 cents per pound on the London Metal Exchange, and a phone rings in a farmhouse in Boyle County, Kentucky. The man on the other end introduces himself as Gerald Voss, Procurement Director for Commonwealth Reclamation Services out of Louisville. He found Walter's name on an old equipment dealer invoice from 1989, a bulk purchase of battery cracking tools and acid neutralization compound. Voss explains, politely, that his firm supplies certified lead feedstock to secondary smelters across the Ohio Valley. They need material that meets industrial input standards, pre-sorted, documented, contamination tested. He asks Walter if he still has any volume worth discussing. Walter Dre, 42 years old, sandy blonde hair pushed back with one hand, the flathead screwdriver with the yellow plastic handle riding his breast pocket like always. Walter says 4 words. How soon can you come? Voss drives down on a Thursday. Gray sedan, pressed shirt, briefcase. He expects a junkyard. What he finds is a system. Walter walks him through the barn. Every battery lot is tagged by date of acquisition, plate grade, and weight. The contamination notes, antimony content, calcium alloy percentages, whether the plates showed sulfation damage, are logged in a green canvas ledger that spans 6 years of entries. Voss flips through it for 11 minutes without speaking. Then he looks at Walter with an expression you'd call respect if you were being generous, closer to disbelief. Here's the thing about documentation. Unsorted scrap lead goes to market at spot price minus handling. You're a commodity, interchangeable with every other pile of gray metal in every other barn in America. But certified feedstock, material with verified composition, traceable chain of custody, documented contamination levels, that commands a 15% premium. Because the smelter doesn't have to test it, doesn't have to sort it, doesn't have to gamble on what's inside. Walter's ledger transforms a pile of dead batteries into verified industrial input. 6 years of patience distilled into columns of ink. Now, let's do the math, because the math is where this story stops being about a stubborn man and starts being about something else entirely. 22,400 pounds of recoverable lead at 42 cents per pound. That's $9,408. The certification premium adds another $1,411. 61 reconditioned batteries, The ones Walter rebuilt with good plates and fresh electrolyte sell in bulk to a fleet operator at $55 each. 3,355 more. But those are the small numbers. Voss doesn't want pieces. He wants the full lot. The entire cataloged inventory, every pound, every reconditioned unit, every documented batch, purchased as a single certified feedstock package. His offer, written on Commonwealth reclamation letterhead with a brass pen that probably cost more than Walter's truck. $214,000. $214,000. For what Dale Henning once called, and I quote from his own inspection report, October 1990, an unlicensed accumulation of hazardous waste maintained by a property owner who lacks the educational background to understand the liability he's creating. That man, that soft-bodied, loafer-wearing, clipboard-clutching man who tilted his head and smiled and said Walter was too ignorant to know what danger looked like. Dale Henning learns the number through the county assessor's office 3 days after the sale closes. Public record. Can't miss it. And his reaction, I want you to picture this clearly, is both hands pressed flat to his forehead at his desk, elbows on the blotter, the tan clipboard with the brass clasp sitting untouched beside his coffee. He doesn't say a word. What would he say? The system he represented told Walter Dre to pay $95 per battery to make the problem disappear. Walter said no. 600 times over, Walter said no. And now the problem is worth $214,000 because one man kept a ledger and the other kept a clipboard. Ruth Kimball shows up at Walter's gate the evening after. Not the next week, the evening after. Word travels fast in Boyle County when a number like that hits the assessor's books. She's not there to congratulate him. Ruth doesn't do that. Steel gray hair pulled tight in its low ponytail, arms crossed, muck boots dusty from her own evening chores. She stands at the gate and asks one question. How did you know? Walter, leaning slightly forward in that deliberate way of his, chin tucked, pale gray-blue eyes steady under straight brows. He doesn't smile. I didn't know. I just didn't quit. She nods once. No handshake. But she sets a jar of sourwood honey on the gatepost before she turns back to her truck. Dark amber, hand-labeled. The first gift anyone has left at that gate in 12 years. The Louisville buyer comes back Friday to finalize paperwork. They shake hands in the barn, standing between the now empty battery racks, and Walter says it aloud for the second time in this story. My grandfather used to say, waste is just a failure of imagination. He pauses, looks at the green ledger in Voss's hands. I think he was being generous. Most of the time it's a failure of patience. Voss doesn't respond to that. He's a procurement man. Philosophy isn't his department. But he clips the ledger shut with something close to reverence. Have you ever wagered everything on an idea no one else believed in? 6 years. 6 years of hauling, cracking, sorting, logging, neutralizing, stacking. 6 years of neighbors driving past without waving. 6 years of Dale Henning's inspections and fines and that tilted head. And the bet pays not because the market moved, though it did, but because documentation is the difference between garbage and inventory. Within 6 months, 3 Boyle County farmers begin saving their own dead batteries in organized sheds rather than paying the $95 disposal fee. They don't call Walter. They don't credit him by name. They just quietly stop loading their trucks for the transfer station and start keeping ledgers of their own. The practice spreads the way real change always does. Not through speeches, not through apologies, but through imitation. Through silence replacing mockery. Walter deposits $214,000 in the Boyle County Savings Bank on a Tuesday afternoon in November 1994, wearing the same olive jacket and tan boots, and the teller asks him twice if the amount is correct. 12 years pass. 12 years of quiet solvency, of fence posts replaced on schedule, of a barn kept cleaner than most people keep their kitchens. The battery business wound down naturally. Lead acid still comes through, still gets reconditioned when it does, but the flood slowed to a trickle as the big box stores started their own recycling programs. Walter Dre doesn't mind. He's 58 years old in the spring of 2006. Silver threading through the sandy blonde hair, he still pushes back with one hand. The same olive green canvas jacket hanging from the same narrow shoulders. The flathead screwdriver with the yellow plastic handle still rides in his breast pocket. The farm's been paid off for a decade. The concrete pad behind the barn is swept monthly. The ventilation hood still draws clean. The charging bank sits maintained, terminals bright, ready for current that rarely flows anymore. He's walking the fence line one April evening, deliberate short steps, chin tucked, measuring the world in boot lengths, when a truck pulls up the gravel drive. His brother's daughter, Colleen, 22, just graduated community college with a certificate in industrial maintenance she hasn't used yet. Same Dre wiry build, same pale gray-blue eyes set deep under straight brows. She steps out of the truck and doesn't ask about the weather, doesn't ask about family. She points at the barn and says, "Can I use the workshop?" Walter stops walking, looks at her, looks at the barn, looks back. For what? Lithium cells. The warehouse district in Danville's shutting down. 3 forklift fleet operators went under last year. There's pallets of spent lithium iron phosphate packs just sitting in those loading docks. Nobody wants to pay the disposal fee. $75 a unit to have them hauled to the recycler in Louisville. He doesn't smile, but the crease across his forehead, that permanent horizontal line, smooths for just a second. "Show me the numbers," he says. She does. Sitting at the kitchen table that night, she lays it out. 340 cells available at the Danville warehouses, offered for free if she hauls them. Lithium iron phosphate, not the volatile cobalt chemistry, not the stuff that catches fire. Stable, heavy, built for industrial cycles. Most of them aren't dead. They're just out of spec for the fleet managers who leased them, cycled past warranty, flagged by software as degraded. Software, not physics. Walter nods. Same song, different instrument. The next morning he opens the barn, pulls the chain on the bare bulb above the workbench, and starts teaching. The diagnostic tap, different on a prismatic lithium cell than on a lead-acid block, but the principle holds. You listen. You measure. You don't assume death until you've tested for it 3 times. The slow charge discipline translates directly. Bring a depleted lithium cell up at C10 and watch the voltage curve for anomalies. If it climbs smooth, the cell's got life. If it steps or plateaus wrong, grade it down. Document everything. Grade, document, recondition, wait, he tells her, leaning against the workbench with his arms crossed. Chemistry changes. The discipline doesn't. She adapts fast, builds a testing jig from angle iron and bus bars, programs a microcontroller to log voltage curves automatically, something Walter never did, never needed to. He watches her solder without comment. The tools are different. The hands are the same. 3 weeks in, she's got her first batch graded. 42 cells out of 60 pulled from a dead forklift pack. 31 grade at 80% capacity or better. 11 sit in the middle tier. The rest, true failures, swollen or cracked, go to the recycler. She keeps a ledger, handwritten, Walter insisted. One evening in late May, after the testing jig's been running all day, Walter walks into the barn carrying 3 objects. He sets them on the workbench without ceremony. The leather journal, half full after 3 generations. Clyde's handwriting giving way to Walter's tighter script around page 40. The brass-capped fountain pen, clipped to the journal's spine the way it always clipped to Clyde's overalls bib. And the yellow-handled screwdriver, pulled from his own breast pocket for the first time in 24 years. He sets them down and steps back, hands in his jacket pockets. No speech, no ceremony. Colleen looks at the objects, looks at Walter, picks up the fountain pen, feels the weight of the brass cap, uncaps it. The nib is still good. She doesn't say thank you. She's a dray. She nods once and sets it back on the journal. What would Clyde say about lithium, she asks. Walter leans against the barn door frame. The evening light catches the 3 freckles below his right ear, that little triangle that's been there since before he ever touched a battery terminal. He's quiet for a moment. Then, he'd say waste is just a failure of imagination, and he'd be right. He was always right about the things that took the longest to prove. That lands like the closing of a gate, not dramatic, just final. Have you ever watched someone pass a thing forward? Not a thing you can hold exactly, but a way of seeing. A discipline that lives in the hands before it lives in the head. That's what's happening in this barn. Not inheritance, continuation. Outside, the Kentucky dusk settles blue and slow over 40 acres of dark, healthy soil that used to be pale as ash. The neighbors are quiet, have been for years. Ruth Kimball's place next door runs the same cover crop rotation Walter taught her in '96. Nobody laughs at the Dre farm anymore. Nobody's laughed in a long time. And against the barn's west wall, the next pile is already beginning to grow. Lithium packs stacked on pallets, black cases stamped with forklift manufacturers' logos, waiting for hands that know how to listen before they diagnose. The barn glows warm from inside. Colleen's silhouette bends over the workbench, the bare bulb casting her shadow long across the concrete pad. Walter walks the fence line in the last light, deliberate short steps, chin tucked, measuring. The journal sits open on the workbench under the same bare bulb, Clyde's brass fountain pen clipped to its spine, and Colleen's handwriting begins on the next blank page. Waste is just a failure of imagination. Uncle Walter told me that. He got it from his grandfather. I'm writing it down so the next one doesn't have to hear it secondhand.